I'm not sure I've ever seen a game with a more hell-filled development hell, yet still managed to actually pull through that hell and release than Devil's Third. Beginning development way back in 2008 and slated to be an Xbox 360 exclusive, trouble began almost immediately as their publishing deal with Microsoft fell through. THQ then picked up the game in 2009, with releases planned on PS3 and PC, and then THQ went bankrupt in 2013. A third publisher, Dubik, stepped up to the plate, and now a mobile phone release was also being planned and developed for, before they went out of business as well. Of course, just to rub it in, publishers weren't the only thing Devil's Third had to worry about. They were also forced to change game engine halfway through development because, you guessed it, the company behind their original engine also went bankrupt. Then the engine changed a third time, though I couldn't find a reason why online, eventually sticking with Unreal Engine 3, and the game was re-revealed at E3 2014, now being published by Nintendo as a Wii U exclusive. With the game changed so much since its debut trailer that the 3 characters featured in the game's logo aren't even in the game anymore. So, 7 years of trouble-fraught game development later, and against literally every possible odd, the game finally released. And everyone hated it. Devil's Third is a total failure. Devil's Third is not an unplayable game, but it may as well be for all it offers. Devil's Third is an ugly, unoriginal, archaic adventure that seems determined to sabotage everything good in it. Devil's Third literally broke into my house, pissed on my rug, and had sex with my wife. But I mean, is it really that bad? I mean, games are rarely ever a fully consistent experience. Even the best games ever made still have those certain sections and aspects of them that make you roll your eyes and groan when you reach them. And the reverse is also true. Even the worst games can still have genuine moments of greatness tucked away inside, but are often never widely appreciated or even discovered in the first place. So while the consensus may be that Devil's Third is a bad game, are there still good aspects and moments within it to be discovered? And, perhaps divorced from the years of expectations leading up to the game's release, going back to the game today with no preconceptions of what the game should be and no chance to be disappointed by what it is or isn't, is it even that bad in the first place? So I know I've already been showing gameplay throughout this video, so it's probably redundant to explain what you've already been seeing, but you know, it's like the proper YouTube thing to do. So what is Devil's Third? Finally released in 2015, developed by Valhalla Games and directed by how do I pronounce his name? Tomonobu Itagaki Oatmeal? What the fuck is that? Developed by Valhalla Games and directed by Tomonobu Itagaki, the creator of Dead or Alive and the Ninja Gaiden reboots, Devil's Third is a third-person shooter hack-and-slash hybrid, combining the typical level design and shooting mechanics you'd find in Call of Duty, but in third person obviously, with the hack-and-slash gameplay of Ninja Gaiden. And describing it like that, it sounds awesome, and in a lot of ways it is. It's a third-person shooter, but now instead of pressing a button to instant kill someone when they're close to you, it turns into Ninja Gaiden for a bit, and you can slice, dice, smash, crash, poke and shank your enemies into tiny little giblets, and honestly, it's actually a lot of fun, even if nowhere near as mechanically deep as any of its hack-and-slash contemporaries, or even something simpler like Yakuza. There's no style meter, juggling, upgradable combos, or really any combos at all, But it's fine because it isn't trying to be mechanically deep like those other games, but rather just use those games' base gameplay to make for more satisfying melee combat here. You have the Y button for speedy attacks, X button for heavy attacks, you've got blocks, rolls, jump attacks, and you can even throw your weapon too if you really want to. Or, if you're like me, accidentally because you kept forgetting what buttons did what. Hit an enemy enough times until they either die, or you do a cool cinematic finishing move and then they die. There's a surprising variety of weapons too, even if they all fall into one of about 4 different weapon types. They still all have subtle differences between them that make picking up new ones you haven't come across yet feel worthwhile. The only thing I wish was different about the melee combat would be to have more opportunities to actually do it. Being a shooter first and a hack and slasher second, and being a shooter made in that time after health bars were uncool and before it was cool to bring them back again, means it's a get shot and wait behind cover for health to regen type game, which makes it very dangerous to rush out from cover to melee an enemy, especially when you're still vulnerable as you attack them, and there being no extra reward for doing so. Now that might just be me criticising the game for being something different than how I would prefer it to be, but I'd say right now it's like a 75 to 25 shooting melee ratio, when I think 50-50 would feel a bit more balanced. Maybe something like the Doom reboot where melee kills could recover some of your health would help encourage more risky moves like that. But as it stands, it's not like the current way the game is laid out is bad or anything. It just feels like a bit of a shame that the melee combat is often secondary to the shooting, when it is also way better than the shooting. If the melee combat is pretty good, then I'd say the gunplay is only pretty average. I'm going to be awful at describing why the guns don't feel all that great to shoot, but they don't feel all that great to shoot. They feel very weightless, I guess, as you fire them, which probably has a lot to do with just how bad a lot of the sound effects for them are. They aren't great. Aiming manually also didn't feel that good, but that could also just be down to the fact I haven't touched a Wii U gamepad in like half a decade and I'm just not used to it again. But thankfully there's pretty generous aim assist, and the frankly excellent cover system means that even if the guns are pretty mediocre in and of themselves, the whole shooting framework surrounding the gunplay is solid enough to always keep you moving forward and never becomes frustrating. On the whole then, while I definitely enjoy the melee aspect of the combat more, as a whole package it's still fairly enjoyable, especially thanks to how easy it is to swap from shooting to melee and vice versa. Pretty enjoyable, but there is of course the elephant in the room, and I can't exactly hide from it anymore. It's been in front of you the whole time, and even though this game runs at 60 FPS, supposedly, even in this 30 FPS YouTube video, you've no doubt already noticed the frame rate drops. Like, what is there to say really? I've played 3D GBA games that run better than this at times. Hell, there's probably 3D original Game Boy games more performant than Devil's Third is. I mean, considering this game was being developed on 2 completely different engines before landing on Unreal Engine 3, and being developed when the Wii U was just being conceptualized by Nintendo and wasn't anywhere close to existing yet, it seems like a miracle it's even running here at all. Still not great though, even with that said. Textures take literal, countable seconds to load in, some never load in at all, sometimes if you're really lucky and inside a building, looking directly at a wall, on the outskirts of a level, the game might hit 60 FPS, but for most times in combat, even saying it averages around 30 feels like I'm being generous. And it's a shame, because underneath all that crust, I think there is actually a decent looking game there. decent for, Wii U standards. It's not holding a candle to anything else released in 2015. But there are some really nice details here, like the way all the palm trees get blown about by the helicopter blades in this level, and some levels in the game are honestly downright beautiful. It's just that the frame rate obviously presents quite a strong barrier of entry, though I will say for what it's worth, it never got in the way of my gameplay personally. I found the aim assist and reliable cover system meant I was never hindered by it, even if it did get pretty bad in some places. I don't want to sound like I'm giving the game a free pass here, because obviously this frame rate is atrocious, and every game reviewer of the time was 100% right to call it out, especially when it was brand new and cost, I assume, like 50 quid. Like, please don't get me wrong, it is bad, but playing it nowadays, I can go back to it now just like I can any older game with a poor frame rate and adapt to it, and accept it as part of the experience, especially knowing what turmoils the developer had to go through just to get the game out even in this state. The frame rate is by far the worst aspect of Devil's Third, and nowadays almost poses a question to the modern day player of, is it worth it? Is there anything in this game worth braving this frame rate for? And for me, there absolutely was. What I found was a fascinating game. One I expected the absolute worst from going in, and while there are definitely a lot of bad aspects and perplexing design choices, for every moment like that, there were these flashes of brilliance and incredibly fun gameplay that made the whole playthrough worth it to me. Even to the point that I would genuinely argue that Devil's Third isn't even that bad. So let's start with the story, and much like the gameplay, it has two very distinct halves, and the clashing of these two halves makes for an absolutely bizarre final package. I don't normally like the term "so bad it's good", because often it feels like it's used to put down games that actually have excellent qualities that exist outside the gameplay, which are enjoyable in their own right, but because the gameplay is perceived as bad, that makes it lesser somehow, so you have to wrap the whole game in this sense of irony to justify your enjoyment of it. I'm definitely using it to describe Devil's Third story though. On the one hand, you have your allies, the US military, who serve as your stereotypical kinda dude bro modern military game archetype. No real personality traits between any of them apart from a shared love of the US of A, and their blood which bleeds red, white and blue. Everyone on your team is completely forgettable and one note, mostly speaking to you in the form of these Call of Duty-ass briefing screens, as their animated GIF-looking asses try to desperately lip-sync what they're saying to you. And in complete contrast to all of this are the bad guys, the SOD, who feel like they were ripped straight from an alternate reality version of Metal Gear Solid 3, in a reality where Metal Gear Solid 3 was lacking all subtlety and general goodness in its script. The main character, Ivan, is a SOD defect, leaving the group when he realised that innocent people were getting killed as part of all that terrorism they were doing. Shocking revelation, that one. Chilling out underground in a maximum security prison, he's called out of his hole by the US government when the SOD managed to gain control of literally every Soviet satellite in orbit around the world, and inputting a self-destruct code. The resulting explosions and debris wiping out nearly all other satellites in orbit and causing a worldwide EMP, knocking out the majority of the world's electronics. And then halfway through the game it turns out they're making a poison gas that can also turn people into zombies, and it's something that appears in one level halfway through the game and is never seen again until randomly for one boss fight right at the end where it's brought back. It's it's a story, alright. The cherry on top definitely being the dryness of it all, taking itself way too seriously, until suddenly it won't take itself seriously at all. Like in the last level where, as most modern aircraft were wiped out by the EMP, your general has to call up a load of OAP World War II vets to provide air support out of nowhere. The rest of the game though is very serious, the main villains of the game making sure to speak in monologue to Ivan whenever you meet them, which is often the first time you see them, so you have no idea who they are, if their relationship with Ivan was any good prior to all this, as they explain their motivations and philosophy to you with all the nuance and grace you would expect Devil's Third to be able to deliver, which is of course none. This guy stands at the altar of a church and asks if Ivan has come to pray for his soul. This is 5 minutes after a flashback showing that he murdered children with a poisonous gas so toxic it turned their legs into a four-sided shape. It isn't a great story, but I would be lying if I said I still didn't get some level of very silly enjoyment from it. As for the actual levels the gameplay serves and the story strings along, well, they're your typical third-person shooter fare, which is honestly one of the more disappointing things about the game to me. Ivan is so agile, being able to sprint, dodge, run up walls. Yet there's only one combat encounter in the entire game I can think of that actually takes advantage of that mobility in any way, the rest being your typical flat battlefields littered with convenient chest-high walls. With how nimble you are, especially with all the melee attacks as well, having more freedom in these arenas to explore and have more options on how to tackle these encounters would have been really nice to see. Not that they're bad as they are, they're all designed decently enough for what they are, but compared to that glimpse of what could have been, you know, it would have been nice to have that throughout the game, rather than just sticking out as a highlight where like 5 minutes before the game ended, the level design suddenly started to bang. It'd be like playing Black Ops 3, with all the mobility and wall running you can do in that game, if none of the maps had anywhere you could actually do any wall running. As for what platforming there is, it's mostly relegated to between fights as a means of slowing down the action for a bit, where Devil's Third also likes to randomly, with no warning, thrust its incredibly strange obsession onto you: bats. Like, literally, once a level, completely out of nowhere, you'll be crawling through a vent, trying to climb up a platform, or opening a door, and a swarm of bats will fly out and deal damage to you. I don't know why they felt the need to make it a recurring theme throughout the game, because it really adds nothing. Like, it's not even annoying, because the solution to the problem the bats introduce is to just walk through them. They come close to killing you, but if you keep going and don't panic when they're there, you'll survive. You encounter them in the first level, and I remember thinking they were awful straight away, and somehow the same thought didn't come to whoever was designing these levels, who decided they actually loved them, and then scattered them throughout the game like an artist leaves a signature. And while we're halfway through this little bitch fest, I may as well get the bosses out of the way too. They're all awful, apart from like 2 of them, which are only okay. They all take place in tight arenas with nowhere to hide. They can kill you in 3 or 4 hits, so if you get down to critical health, all you can do is run away from them like a Scooby-Doo villain waiting for your health to recharge. Hell, some of them can even kill you in 1 hit because they'll have a not very well choreographed insta-kill move. My experience with all the bosses was to die like 10 or 20 times in a row until I figured out the one move that could easily cheese them, and then easily cheesed them. guns were almost always completely worthless in these fights, as they do nowhere near enough damage to even come close to killing them, even with full ammo. The only bosses I didn't completely hate were the first boss, whose main attack is to throw molotovs at the cover you're hiding behind, not the brightest button in the box, that one, and this Duke Nukem looking ass boss that appears out of nowhere near the end of the game. I don't think it's a coincidence that these are the only two non-melee orientated bosses in this game. The last boss also kind of fucks. He's a melee only boss, but it's kind of appropriate. And the setting of the boss battle is like the only time in this entire game that it gets really creative and really cool. I don't know, it was fun. Hard, but it was meant to be. It's the final boss, so it kind of got away with it there. As you can see, Devil's Third is not a very consistent game. For every aspect of it I've been able to praise in this video, I've equally been able to bring up aspects that are frustrating and annoying. But there was one standout level about halfway through the campaign that really, well, stood out to me, where everything about the game feels like it perfectly clicked together, and where it manages to rise above just being mediocre or average, and actually manages to get really, really good. I love absolutely everything about this level, and if you've never played Devil's Third before, this level is also probably the only imagery of the game you have in your head, and that's for good reason. It was the focus of a lot of the marketing, so they clearly knew it was the best one. Set on one of a series of islands off the coasts of Japan and Russia, combining architecture and cultures from both countries, this traditional Japanese town was created as a tourist attraction and has now been turned into an enemy fortress. While I wouldn't say Devil's Third is an ugly game, this level in particular stands out among the rest and manages to look absolutely jaw-dropping in places. The orange glow and warmth of the traditional lanterns and streets contrast against the shadow of the mountainside looming in the distance, strange blue lava pouring out of the side. The inviting atmosphere of the town is pierced by the aggressive floodlights of the enemy forces. Every street and alleyway is bursting with details, signs for upcoming movies, posters for alcohol showing the merging of cultures on the island, and above it all, on the rooftops, are ninjas ready to drop down on you at any moment. From a gameplay standpoint, it's a very fast-moving level that flows really nicely. There's no extended arena fights against tougher foes, but it has momentum as you make your way up the mountainside, flanking around any potential roadblocks you come across. It even holds a pretty steady frame rate throughout, which is incredibly rare for this game. Ivan even manages to break out of his wooden blank personality for a split second and tells a joke that actually made me laugh.
What's up with the paint job? Looks like an album cover.
You're showing your age, Captain.
And it's all topped off with an incredible finale. As you reach the base of the mountainside fortress, the music and atmosphere completely change. The music is no longer bombastic and exciting, but an almost haunting melody played on a shamisen as an unknown woman sings over it. The audio mix favours the song, overpowering the other sound effects in the game, and as you fight your way further and further towards the end of the level, the music picks up in pace and becomes more and more frantic as more enemies are thrown at you, until finally you reach the top. Open a sliding door to find the woman who was playing the song the entire time. And she's a fucking MILF. This level literally couldn't get any better. That is unless we didn't have to fight her, because this is still Devil's Third, so of course she's another annoying boss fight with another poorly telegraphed insta-kill move. Apart from that, admittedly, a little bit anticlimactic of an ending to the level, it's still really good, and almost single-leveledly, I guess, made the playthrough worth it for me. But even that said, the entire game has this kinda strange vibe to it. Part of that has to do with the majority of the game taking place on that before mentioned series of islands between Russia and Japan. You get a lot of cool environments mixing those two cultures together in a way I don't think I've ever seen in a game before, or even really thought about being a thing that could happen in real life. Like, one level starts in a very Eastern European looking town, but then turn the corner, and there's a district of it all based on Asian architecture. And then one sewer trip later and you're in an abandoned hospital being chased by zombies. Yeah, like I said, weird vibe. But probably the bigger factor contributing to that mysterious feeling is definitely not intentional, but it's how abandoned these levels feel. And I don't mean by characters or the world in-game, but by actual real people. This game sold dreadfully. Like, it's hard to state how badly it sold, but in America, GameStop only received 420 copies to sell on their online store across the entire country. As a result, the levels have this completely new feeling, completely divorced from anything the game is actually trying to convey. The feeling of digital urban exploration. Exploring and appreciating these environments becomes a lot more exciting in a way, knowing that only a few thousand people in the entire world have ever seen them before you did. It feels like there's constantly something around the corner to discover, and if you do discover any small detail and appreciate it, you might have genuinely been the first person ever to have noticed it. So, what else is there once you've beaten the game? You could go back through the levels and find all the collectibles, and if you're really lucky, their textures might even load when you go to look at them. There's also a score attack mode, which is fun for what it is, but could have definitely been a lot better. I'm not gonna pretend I'm above getting excited and feeling good when a random number comes up on screen saying how many kills in a row I've gotten or whatever. That aspect of it is a lot of fun, and definitely entices you to play more aggressively than you would have otherwise, and getting to choose your loadout at the start of the mission also adds to that. But that's also all this game mode adds. Apart from tracking score, time, and letting you pick your weapons, these are still just the campaign missions you've already played through, and, as such, even though you're being timed this time round, you still have to wait around through cutscenes and for all your AI companions to catch up to you, making it a lot less enjoyable than it really should be. Ideally, these would be special versions of the campaign levels, cutting out the AI partners entirely so you could just run through as fast as you could with no roadblocks. But judging by how noticeably worse this mode runs than the main campaign, that's probably asking way too much for a game whose code is almost certainly spaghetti together so much it's even a miracle that this mode exists in any form at all. As it stands, it honestly adds so little replay value and is so not different from the main campaign that they might as well just have added the scoring to the main campaign mode and not included this entirely. Finally, there's the online multiplayer. Sorry, I appear to have misread that. The online multiplayer. Or at least, there used to be multiplayer. The servers closed down years ago now, but from what very little I remember of it, it was actually pretty fun. It had this whole base building aspect to it, where people could invade you and you'd have to defend it. It also had a weird obsession with chicken and eggs. I'm not really sure what that was about. Maybe if it was a golden bat you had to collect, I would have understood it more. Though probably what I remember most about it was having to wait like 10 minutes to get into a match of like 4 people, which is probably why I remember so little of it as a whole. I don't know, it was fun for what it's worth. Not that it's worth a lot anymore, now you literally can't play it. Maybe the funniest thing to look back on nowadays though is how it got absolutely trashed at the time because it had microtransactions in it. Which is good, obviously, it was right to call that out, but reading that again nowadays really made me be like, holy shit, we really had no idea how bad things were about to get. Anyway, let's stop that thought before it gets a bit too depressing and start to wrap up this video. Did I do a good job of explaining why I actually kind of like this game? I really hope I did. In my opinion, Devil's Third is definitely nowhere near as bad as so many made it out to be. Yes, it has its rough patches. Yes, it runs terribly. Yes, the campaign isn't very long. And yes, especially for the time it came out, to run and look like this after expecting someone to pay full price for it was definitely not good, I guess is a way to say it. But nowadays, looking back on it, I almost don't see it as a game that came out in 2015. Like, knowing about the game's development, it almost seems unfair to compare it to the games it released alongside, when in actual fact it was probably meant to come out way back in like 2010. Like, it's a way less extreme version of reviewing something like the long-cancelled Star Fox 2, originally meant to release in 1996 but finally seeing the light of day in 2017, and reviewing it as if it literally came out in 2017. Not that anyone would have done that. You know, not that the frame rate would have been great in 2010 either, but it feels less bad in a way. And either way doesn't really matter nowadays because I'm going back to it with that in mind. Playing it now, away from the context and price paid for it, which for me was nothing because I got it as a present when it came out, it's a game that is rough around the edges, but has a very fun, silly, and enjoyable core, with some real standout moments, which I am so glad I gave the time of day and fully experienced for myself. And literally none of what I've said matters, because you're not going to play it. You're just not. Because the game sold so poorly in some regions and had such a limited release in others, even though literally no one wanted it, because we live in a clown world, it became a rare collector's item and is worth well over $400. And even in the UK, where it didn't have a limited release, can still go for well over £100. Pounds, not dollars, but probably also dollars, but it's pounds over here. So you're not going to pay that much for it. And even though you could buy it for the much more reasonable £20 from the Wii U eShop, statistically, because of how time works, chances are you are watching this after March 2023, which is when the Wii U eShop shuts down. Or shut down, I guess, if you're watching this in the future. So you've missed your chance to play Devil's Third, I'm afraid. But there's no need to be so sad, because what if I told you that Devil's Third isn't a standalone game, but actually got sequels? Yeah, that's sequels with an S. First off, there was Devil's Third Online, a free-to-play version of the game's multiplayer that was released on PC. I have no idea if the servers for this game are still up or not. I don't even know if it came out in English, to be honest. I can find absolutely nothing about this online, apart from the fact it exists. Or existed, I'm assuming existed because the Wii U multiplayer servers shut down ages ago. I'd assume it was the same with this. But as for actual sequels, in 2018, Rockshot was released to Steam Early Access. Developed by Soleil, a game studio made up of basically everyone from Valhalla Games minus Itagaki, Rockshot is a free-to-play multiplayer shooter which appears to have basically been built directly off of Devil's Third, with weapons, animations, and even the base building of that game being directly lifted and placed into this one. Devil's Third in basically every way but name, really, and just like Devil's Third Online, has also seemingly fizzled out completely. As far as I can tell, there's no way to download it from Steam anymore, and this not very positive sounding post by the developers seems to imply it closed down like literal months after it launched. But finally, and the point I've been trying to get to after wading through all this history, is the actual sequel to Devil's Third you're going to want to keep your eyes on. Wanted Dead. Scheduled for release February 2023, these guys are absolutely determined not to give up on Devil's Third because Wanted Dead appears to be Devil's Third 2 in every way but name, and better than it in every way possible. It looks really stylish, it has its own personality with its cyberpunk setting, rhythm, karaoke and ramen eating minigames, weird mixtures of anime and live action cutscenes. It looks weird, just like Devil's Third, I'm here for it. Combat-wise, it looks like a more polished and improved Devil's Third, to the point I think I even spotted, I don't know if it's spotting when you hear something, but I think I heard some of the same sound effects from Devil's Third in here as well. And I am so glad that the developers knew how much potential the game had and never chose to give up on it. They'll have been trying to make Devil's Third work in one form or another for over 12 years, and for once, it seems like it might actually be working. Reception to these trailers have been overwhelmingly positive. They're all getting over 500,000 views, and commenters are all saying how much fun it looks to play, comparing it to the type of fun, crazy PS2 game that feels like it would never get made nowadays. Which I think is a nice vibe for it to try and capture and play towards. After all, Devil's Third was basically already there, discounting all the jank it had attached to it. Interestingly though, not one mention of Devil's Third anywhere in these comments from what I can see, nor in the trailer where they literally list out all the games the developers had worked on, which I can only imagine is probably for the best. But I'm here for it. I can feel it in my bones. The Devil's Third redemption arc is finally upon us. If Wanted Dead is actually any good, that is. But I'll be there on day one no matter what. Just like I was with Devil's Third.